All right, can everybody see Fall 2019 parent volunteer registration on the screen in front of them?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, so this is the regular seasonal preference form that all parents have to go through before they can register any players. The only change to this section is that there is now a built-in check depending on how you answer, and that if you are eligible for the volunteer membership program, and I'll explain what that means in a second, then it will automatically direct you to provide some additional information. And everything I'm going to say tonight is documented on our fairly extensive, terribly exciting documentation page for how all this works. It has a lot of frequently asked questions. I'll post the link here in chat. Let me do that now. And I'll also send it out by email if anyone doesn't have it. Let me just pull that up here so it's in front of us. There we go, and I'll put it in chat. Controls. There we go. The way eligibility is determined is quite simple. If by selecting something you would possibly get system access within inLeague, you are going to need to go through the volunteer membership program. It is easier to describe the people who do not have to go through the program, and that is anyone who selects one of these additional volunteer rules here on the bottom. These are the league-defined rules, the ones that you can make up, and you have control over whether they trigger the volunteer membership program. By default, all of them do, but you can go through, anyone with webmaster access to your inLeague instance can go through and designate one or more of the rules as not requiring one. That is entirely at your discretion. But anything else, coach or referee or assistant coach, and certainly any access level that you would grant that's not just a volunteer preference, but an actual role in the system like division director, chief referee, player administrator, any of those things require the completion of the volunteer membership program. So in this case, I've selected coach, and I'm going to update. And the first part of this, the volunteer membership program is only required once. It is something that AYSO uses to link records between inLeague and AYSO, which is the last 4 digits. Start muting if I hear echoes. It looks like we're good for the moment. Okay, so I'm going, this is our demo site, so this is not a real volunteer record. AYSO has not yet rolled this out in production, but for now, I'm going to put in a value. This value is encrypted in our database. It cannot be retrieved. It can only be erased. So if someone inputs the wrong number, anyone with registrar access can reset the record, but no one can actually get at this information, not even us. After this, it contacts AYSO with the volunteer's information and it matches up the record, which it's just done. That's invisible to the volunteer. It takes a few seconds. And then it goes through, anyone who's been through AYSO will be familiar with this part of the process. It's the previous disclosures portion. AYSO asks that you disclose voluntarily whether you've ever been convicted of a crime. And if you say yes, then you can provide details. This is identical to the screen on Blue Sombrero. Anyone who's ever been through their volunteer registration process, it's quite heavily prescribed by AYSO. So I'm going to say no, and it then directs me to volunteer e-signature. Now, this part of the process is a little bit redundant with what ultimately happens with the background check, and that you're signing a bunch of disclaimer language, you're filling out a disclosure, you're sending it to AYSO. It all goes into a package that is ultimately reviewed by the AYSO CBPA in the event that anything does come up. But also remember that this process is brand new this year, and it's been delayed so that we can try and iron out as many of the technical kinks and procedural and policy kinks as we can before it goes public. But it's also going to evolve over time. The first year is going to be a little bit bumpy, even if everything runs smoothly technically. Once we have a list of volunteers that we know that you like and you want to subsidize that list every year, the burden on the region is going to be less, And we're also going to, we have an avenue with AYSO to take our feedback to them and say, look, what's this e-signature doing? Isn't it redundant? I don't know the answer to that question. I'm just picking it as an example. To try and essentially eliminate as many barriers to volunteering as we can, because that's always been one of our missions here at inLeague. And obviously this whole program is one giant barrier to volunteer. It's for good reason, and we want to make sure we do it right, but we want to make sure that all of these things have been carefully considered. And this year there's so much that everyone is racing to do that there hasn't been as much of an occasion for that as we'd like. But I'm going to go ahead and complete this e-signature. This is also all done just like the player e-signature through YoZones, which is AYSO's e-signature provider. It's all done seamlessly. We direct you to them. They direct you back to us. So none of this is happening on inLeague, but the parent does not have to log out, open a new window, or do anything like that. It's all done for them. They save this, the volunteer application is what they call it, and then it directs it back to inLeague. We then, behind the scenes, we take the volunteer package and we send it to AYSO through their E3 system. So at this point in the process, the volunteer is now registered with AYSO. This takes the place of what used to happen in AYSO. So there's nothing else is required just from the vantage point of AYSO knowing who the volunteer is. At this point, there's several different things that can happen, and they're up to you as to how it happens. The default behavior is that because I've expressed an interest in volunteering, I've landed in a pool of applicants that the region can review and decide if they want to subsidize the background check. The reason for this being that if you're a sizable region and you have maybe 500 volunteers a year, how many people do you get that say they're going to volunteer but don't actually volunteer? In most cases, it's anywhere double that number, and you don't want to be paying for 1,000 background checks to get 500 volunteers. There are several ways of approaching this problem, and we've given it quite a bit of thought. Everything from, do we want to just automatically approve people to whom you've given system access, like division heads, to which we answered yes, we do, to do we want to provide an option for you to just pay for everyone and then sort it out later? We do have that option. You also have the option of paying for nobody and letting all your volunteers pay for themselves. But the default behavior is that they go into a holding tank. Go over here to, and you all see this volunteer background check pre-authorization status. You should see another adult record right here. Let me pull up the So this top record, another adult, is the one I've just done. And there's a couple ways of navigating this. You can approve a volunteer for just one season. Most of the time, what you're going to want to do, particularly if you know the volunteers, is you're going to want to select always approve. That eliminates the need to do this in the future. It says, I know this person's good. If they say they want to be a coach, they're going to be a coach. So that cuts down a lot of your burden going forward. I'm going to select approve. Oops. All right. And then they should now be on the approved list. There we are. We can remove that approval later, but the way that this works now that they've been approved, every half hour or so, inLeague goes and checks for any volunteers that have been approved but have not yet been submitted to Verified Volunteers, which is the organization that's doing the background check, and it submits them. And this is where we tell them that the region is going to pay or not. That's the reason why we have this part of the process. If we didn't do this and we just let the volunteer proceed, they could do that, but they would have to pay for it themselves. There's no way to preemptively approve someone who has not yet made it through this point. So, you can't just take last year's list and say all of these people are good. We are looking at ways to streamline this process. One good idea that came out of Manhattan earlier this week is that if you actually assign someone to a team as a coach, even if you haven't approved them yet, even if they haven't maybe even volunteered yet, that we might consider that a preemptive approval. it's been everything we could do to get this out the door on time, just to check all the boxes we have to check. We know that this is probably the biggest pain point, and we're interested in improving it as much as we can. But now that I've approved another adult, the record I just submitted, it would automatically email them, because inLeague contacts verified volunteers. It says, here's this adult, here's their AYSO ID, it's for membership year 2019, and go ahead and invite them to continue the process. So between the time you click that approve button and when they get that email is 30 minutes or less. If for any reason they're sitting right there and you just want to plow ahead, if they are in this sort of holding pattern where they haven't got the email yet, but they've done everything else, they will have this button on their family profile that says, you've been approved, we're ready to go, it just hasn't happened yet. Most people will never have to do this, they'll just get the email later that day, but since we're all here, I'm going to go ahead and proceed. And there's really nothing interactive required for this portion. inLeague just sends the package to verified volunteers, and then if in my email box over here, I very likely have a link. It's very, very fast. Verified volunteers is a pretty responsive service. So let's see. I'll wait for that to arrive. And then I will open that and share it with all of you. There we go. I now have, let me see if I can change the share window over here so you can see it. Let's see. There we go, invitation from AYSO. This is from their QA development system, so it's the images may not be and the text may not be final compared to what an actual volunteer would see. We wanted to get a production sample for you, but that wasn't possible. Go ahead and open this link and then change the share back to my browser. You should all see welcome to verified volunteers. And it has sent all of the volunteer information that Verified wants from us, but they have this first step when you accept the invitation where you create an account. And for this section, and this is a little bit confusing to me, I'm hoping it won't be elsewhere, the information you enter here is not used for the background check. It doesn't have to match anything. So you can, obviously we expect that volunteers will put in their regular account information, the same email address. It doesn't matter if it doesn't match up though, because it's not what's going to be used for the actual check. Oops, never mind. I'm completely mistaken. It does need to match. So let's see here. What is my birth date? Now I need to go back and find out what I put in. This was something that we brought to AYSO's attention early on, and that there wasn't any verification that the person completing the background check was the person who had signed up to volunteer. So let's see. Date of birth, 3/1/1981.
That seems like something they would definitely have wanted to fix.
Yes, well, I'm glad they did. So a lot of the reason for the delay, a lot of the time that we've spent since the original, I think it was early April launch date, has been on sort of use cases like this of how do we validate these people? How do we make sure that the person being checked is the correct person? Oops. Doesn't like my password. Let's give it a better one. Okay. So in this case, because the league has elected to pay for the background check, it's going to tell them AYSO will pay this. One nice thing that Verified Volunteers has done that they've worked out with AYSO is that if I decide to, I can still elect to pay for it. So if you have particularly generous volunteers, they will have the ability to pay for their own background check, even if they don't have to. So all of this stuff, the name, date of birth, these fields are locked. They cannot be changed here. This is good and it's bad. It's good in that we know the person lines up with the same inLeague or Blue Sombrero volunteer application because the information can't be changed. It's bad in that if I typed it in wrong originally, it's now wrong here too, and that's no good. In some cases, this won't matter. You know, if you put in your middle name incorrectly or you don't put in one at all, that's unlikely to impact anything. If you have a wrong date of birth or wrong first name, and this can be a problem, Al, Alfredo, that sort of thing, that can throw a wrench in the works, and I'll cover the solution to that. It does require that a registrar manually resets your record and that you essentially repeat this process. It's a bit cumbersome, but remember that the whole reason that we're here is increased security and validation that you are who you say you are, and that we can check out your record for whoever it is you say. It's asking me to confirm my current address. My understanding is that these fields are going to be locked. It's not done yet, but within the next week or so, you will not be able to change this either. You will still be able to put in how long you live there. The text you see here is going to depend on the state you live in. It has a lot to do with local laws. Continue. And then here's where it's prompting me if I want to pay some or part of the background check, I can. I'm going to say no. FastPass is an option. It will let you have a portable background check. If you volunteer for other organizations that also use verified volunteers, you can essentially take your AYSO background check and use it elsewhere. Unfortunately, you cannot do the reverse. If you already have one from another organization, you cannot apply it to AYSO. Oops. Go. All right, so that's been done. There's no billing since, in this case, AYSO paid for my hypothetical background check. So I'm going to end this share. All right, so that's as much of the process as can be seen now. If I were to go back to inLeague in my family profile, it would say pending because all the rest of the process happens behind the scenes. If my background check is clear, then Verified Volunteers notifies AYSO, and AYSO instantly, or rather automatically, not so instantly, notifies us, and then everything is clear on the inLeague side. If there's anything that comes up, obviously the variety of what can arise in a background check is pretty large. AYSO deals with that manually. The CVPA receives the exact results from Verified Volunteers, and then they reduce it to one or more color codes that translate to no funds, can't handle money, no coaching, can't coach a team. For simplicity's sake, we interpret any result other than absolutely clear as you did not pass. We are erring on the side of caution, so even if you only volunteer to be a coach, and even if your background check says you are totally fine around kids, but you cannot be trusted with money, we still regard that as you did not pass the check. Those edge cases are areas where possibly we will be able to revisit it or allow regional commissioners to override the results. For the time being, that is not the case. We want to see how this goes and how often that happens, since it is fairly unusual for it to happen at all. In any case, the results of the check, if they are not clear, are sent because they come from the CVPA and because it is a manual process. They are sent, as I understand it, to the regional commissioner and to the volunteer in question. inLeague only gets notified of that it's not clear. There's no data in inLeague as to why or what came up. So inLeague won't be able to answer those questions, and you will not be able to look up a record in inLeague and see why. You will be able to look up a record and see that it didn't pass. These checks are done once per membership year. We always want the most recent check. So if if it's March for March 2020, and you apply to be a volunteer for fall of 2020, and you get a background check and it's clear, we're going to accept it for MY 2019 as well, even if you didn't have one on file. Things can get a little bit complicated with overlapping membership years. That's also something we're going to work on with AYSO because it's more of a policy issue than a technical one. But that's also not an issue for us right now because, unlike with Sombrero, we're not dealing with this system for MY 2018. So we don't have any overlap to worry about. That's the abbreviated version of it. There's a little bit more in terms of region's ability to handle the applicant pool. Like I say, we're still working on that. We're still trying to figure out what's the least amount of human effort, but there's no two ways about it. There's going to be a lot of work required to get everybody through this the first year. And then if we're all still here next year, then it will be quite a bit easier, both because of technical enhancements we expect to be able to make and because you'll already have a lot of people we hope approved, not just for 1 year, but for the life of the system, even though they still have to repeat the check every year. I'm going to open it up for questions. Let me actually turn on some video so you can see my smiling face. Here's me. Here's the inLeague home office. Open up. There's not so many of us here that if you have a question, just go ahead and we'll take them as they come.
Hey,
Sam, it's Gary. Can you hear me?
I can. Go ahead, Gary.
Looking at the number of volunteers, they really come in two groups, core and travel. The travel do background checks somewhere else, and they also get insurance and everything else somewhere else. Are you able to exclude anybody in certain travel roles from being put through the system?
No. It's technically possible. That's the first I've heard that there's another whole entity doing that, although knowing what I know about how travel works in New York, I'm not surprised to learn that. The way that we enforce this, we've started out enforcing it in a sort of draconian manner with the idea that we'll dial it back to make exceptions as cases like that come up, because that sounds like a very reasonable request of, if we know this is being done, can we turn this off? The problem is that inLeague is representing to AYSO that we're doing this and we're doing it for everyone. I don't know, and it's not really a technical question. Is it all right for us to say, well, AYSO, here's this volunteer, we're giving them access to an AYSO roster and an AYSO region, but they had all this done somewhere else?
They're not using the AYSO rosters.
Well, if they're registering through inLeague, then their player data is being sent to AYSO and everything is happening through AYSO. Now, I understand that isn't actually the case for what you're talking about, so let's follow up offline with that, and so I can better understand the exception and how it works. It may be, it's going to be difficult because a lot of this is done on the volunteer level before they're assigned to a team. But it might be that we can carve out an exemption where if you already know who your coaches are, we can grant them access anyway, but that's a conversation we need to have with Meredith and probably also with AYSO National to make sure, because
Sam,
it's otherwise.
may I respond to that from an AYSO point of view?
Go ahead.
Is the reverb too bad?
You know what, let's actually, because we have a lot of people here for whom that is not going to be a question, let's get through the rest of the questions and then we can talk about New York separately or offline, because I fully expect that some accommodation will have to be made because we don't want to add layers of bureaucracy for a system that isn't even going to be used.
And if Gary wants to join that, that'd be great too.
So let's follow up with that after this.
Are you going to have another webinar for administrators, like on how to actually set the system up? So, the thing about paying for it, or for example, my CVPA needs to know about how to use it.
There is remarkably little that in the system to do. There's essentially that one screen of approving volunteers. All the other options in terms of whether or not you want to pay for everyone or pay for no one, those are things you have to take up directly with us. They're not options that we've put in the control panel.
Oh, okay.
Right now, no one has come to us and said, we want all our volunteers to pay for this. We're not paying for anyone. No one has come to us and said, we want to pay for everyone. We thought maybe someone did, but then it turned out not to be the case. So we are 99% sure that everyone is going to be using this approval queue tool that we have made. And we will provide training and answer whatever questions come up from registrars and administrators that need to deal with it. But what we're doing for now is providing that link to the documentation, which covers a lot of frequently asked questions. It covers things like, what if I volunteered in a different region and then I moved over? Do I have to go through all this again? We have a great deal of information there. We spent a lot of time on the documentation, and it's a dense read, but if you have to deal with this program, you've really got to learn it, and there's no other way to do it. But if we need to do another webinar, we certainly will. But typically, we find that it's a little bit idiosyncratic from one league to the next, the types of things that come up. So start with just emailing our support team, and then we'll figure out what the best way forward is from there.
Okay.
David, did you have anything?
I did. I think the second screen that you showed that a volunteer would see was the original AYSO form, the original volunteer form, which is of course very dense.
Mm-hmm.
How does that display on a mobile device?
Not very well. The e-signature piece of the process, well, let me back up a second. Much like player registration, there's a certain amount of volunteer infrastructure that AYSO has that is just always been there. And we've been not free of it in that you all have had to deal with it from sending your volunteers to AYSO, but we haven't had to deal with it as inLeague, except in terms of processing Excel spreadsheets and doing the volunteer certification and synchronization. Because AYSO has this e-signature process in place, that predates all of this volunteer membership stuff. It's just required to participate with AYSO and to do volunteer registration. We asked the question up front. We said, look, what happens with these e-signatures? I mean, what are you actually attesting to? You're going to all this other trouble to volunteer. Where does all this stuff go? And we didn't really get an answer, only that they did think about removing it this year and it didn't get removed, so we still have to do it, and we have no control over how it appears because it's all handled by their e-signature vendor. It's not unreadable, but it is very difficult on a mobile device. I wish I had a better answer for you. The inLeague portion, we've done everything we can. We removed the big masthead that appears on a lot of our pages to make these pages as small as possible, and we've been pretty successful with that. But the e-signature piece it's the thing that we're lobbying to get removed from this process, but we were unsuccessful this year.
Understood. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Sorry, Sam, I was trying to unmute.
Sure.
It's Meredith, who will have the ability to do the approvals in that pool, like that screen you had?
Sure.
What permission?
At the moment, it is just registrars. When we designed it, we anticipated that it would be the case that you might want division heads or division chief refs to approve volunteers just in their division. That is technically possible. It's a bit more work for us because to figure out the axes of what division a volunteer is in just based off of their preferences rather than based off of the teams they've been assigned to, that's always a little bit tricky to do. And so we ran out of time to do it for this year. We may be able to do it in between now and the summer, depending on, we want to get a sense of what the most needed improvements are before we take the next step. And we also just want to make sure the system works, so we're not just going to have to turn off the whole thing, which we're pretty confident that AYSO has covered their bases now, but you never know. So for now, it's just registrars. Although I think we did discuss briefly that notion of automatically approving anyone you assign to a team. That would indirectly give division heads the power to approve someone, because by dint of making them a coach on a particular team, it would remove them from that queue and act like approval anyway. So division heads would never actually even see that tool. We would just either automatically or else through a checkbox on the assign a coach screen, just say, now you can, this is automatically going to clear them. So that might actually be an easier way, but we're going to be looking at that certainly with you before too much longer. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much for your time this evening. We are absolutely willing to do this again. I realize this was on a bit short notice. We were originally hoping that we would have a public beta of this program beginning last week, only to discover that AYSO couldn't do that. We are going to talk with them tomorrow about whether it's possible this week. The current launch date for this system is May 21st. Fortunately for us, there's nothing required. We're ready to go. But any volunteer who registers for fall 2019 before May 21st they will just skip it. And then if they return, they will see a screen. Let me share this one more time. Let's do, yeah, there we go. They will get something very much like this page with this MY 2019 AYSO membership column, and they'll get this incomplete click to resume button. Alternatively, if they go and review their regular seasonal form, which I'll bring up here in a second, if you just resubmit this form, it will also automatically pick it up and send them back, send them through the process that way. But everyone will get this click to resume to carry them through. Any new volunteers after we roll it out will not be able to avoid it if they have to go through it. It will just automatically direct them there before this process is finished. For those of you, which is I think almost everyone, that require adults to finish their volunteer preferences before you can register children for the season, you do not have to complete the AYSO volunteer membership program for that. You only have to complete your seasonal form. So even if you do actually have to go through the volunteer membership program, it's not required to register players, just the reviewing your information and selecting what you want to do for the season. That's the only thing that is absolutely required.
All right, I gotta go.
Thanks so much, Ainsley, and thank you everyone for your time this evening. Please feel free to, if you think of any questions, send them to support@inleague.org, and of course we'll be in touch as the program gets rolled out.
Thanks, Sam.
Take care, everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.